husband can wait by the coat check. This is a family dinner, and frankly, a man who spent his career laying pipe doesn't have much to contribute to the conversation. My daughter's fiancé's mother said this at the welcome dinner she hosted, in her Rosedale dining room with the 12-seat mahogany table and the paintings I later found out cost more than my first house. She said it the way people like her say everything, pleasantly, as if she were commenting on the weather, as if the cruelty was so obvious it didn't require volume. I'm 63 years old. My hands are rough. My back aches on cold mornings, which in Ontario is most mornings from October through April. I've been with my husband for 38 years, and I have never once been ashamed of what he does or what we've built. But I want to be honest with you. In that moment, sitting at that table with the good china and the hired server refilling my water glass, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a young woman working double shifts and trying to hold my chin up. I felt small. Let me go back. My name is Marion. My husband is Glenn, not Glenn. He's very particular about that. One N, it was his grandfather's name. We live in Barrie, about 90 minutes north of Toronto, in a house we've owned for 27 years. We raise 2 kids there. Our son is an electrician, works up in Sudbury now. Our daughter, Cassidy, is a nurse practitioner at a family clinic in Etobicoke. Cassidy is 31, sharp and funny, and exactly the kind of person who remembers your coffee order and your sister's name and the thing you mentioned once 6 months ago that upset you. She gets that from Glenn. I take credit for her stubbornness. She called me on a Tuesday evening in late February. I remember because I was making soup and I had my hands in the broth and I had to grab the phone with a dish towel. "Mum," she said, and I heard it immediately, the particular pitch of barely contained joy. "Tell me," I said. He asked me. I set the dish towel down. I pulled out a chair and sat right there in the middle of the kitchen. My daughter was getting married. His name is Sutton Vance, 28, works in commercial real estate development, which I have since learned means he finds investors for luxury condo projects and attends a great many lunches. He's handsome in the way that men who've never worried about money tend to be: smooth, easy, comfortable in any room. The first time Cassidy brought him to Barrie, he shook Glenn's hand and looked around our living room and said, "Great place," in the tone of voice that meant he was being polite. I noticed, Glenn noticed. We didn't say anything to each other until after they'd left, and even then Glenn just said, "Well, he's very tidy," which for Glenn is practically a character assassination. The engagement period was 8 months. In those 8 months, I learned more about Sutton's family than I ever wanted to know. His mother's name is Constance Vance, which she uses constantly and in full, always with the implication that you ought to recognise it. She chairs fundraising committees. She sits on the board of 2 private schools. She summoned as a verb, which I had not previously encountered in the wild. She wore scarves the way other women wear armour, and she had a way of looking at you while you were speaking that made you feel like you were delivering a mildly disappointing weather report. The first time I met her was for afternoon tea at the King Edward Hotel in Toronto. Cassidy had arranged it. I wore my good blazer, charcoal grey. I'd bought it for my nephew's wedding 2 years before. Glenn wasn't invited. The invitation had come to me alone, phrased as "just the mothers," which should have told me something. Constance looked at my blazer and said, "Lovely colour. So practical." She said it warmly. She said everything warmly. That was her particular skill. Over the next 8 months, I collected those comments the way you collect receipts. You're not sure why you're keeping them. You just know you might need them later. Cassidy tells me you met Glenn at a trade show. We met at a dance in Collingwood when I was 24, but I understood the implication. I imagine Barrie has changed quite a bit. They've been putting up subdivisions, haven't they? She said subdivisions the way someone else might say fungal infection. You must be so proud that Cassidy moved to the city, as if Barrie were a country we'd escaped from. I swallowed it all. Cassidy was happy. Sutton seemed to make her happy. I thought, this is the woman I have to figure out how to love, or at least how to be in the same room with for the next 30 years. I tried. The welcome dinner was in October. Constance hosted it at her home in Rosedale. The house was the kind of house that announces itself before you're inside. Limestone exterior, a professional garden even in fall, a front door that cost more than some cars. She'd invited 14 people. Her side filled 12 seats. Our side was Glenn and me. We arrived on time. Sutton met us at the door, which I appreciated. He took our coats. He was nervous, I could see that, and some part of me softened toward him for it. The dining room was everything you'd expect. I won't pretend I wasn't impressed. I was. But I've learned over the years that beauty in a room has nothing to do with the character of the people who live in it. We were seated at the far end of the table, not across from each other, beside each other, which meant we were effectively a unit, a delegation, positioned to observe rather than participate. Constance and her husband were at the head. Sutton and Cassidy were in the middle. His aunts and cousins and his parents' oldest friends filled the space between. Dinner was served. There was a hired server, a young woman who moved efficiently and quietly. I watched how Constance's relatives spoke to her, not rudely exactly, but with the particular indifference of people who've always had someone in that role and expect to continue having someone in that role and do not think very much about who that person is when she leaves the room. Glenn was quiet. This is what Glenn does in unfamiliar situations. He listens, he observes, he waits. He'd worked 35 years as a pipe fitter and project lead for a mechanical contracting company, and he has the kind of patience that comes from managing complex systems, from understanding that you can't force a joint, you can only prepare the conditions correctly. The conversation moved around us more than it moved with us. Sutton's uncle talked about a golf trip to Portugal. His cousin had just returned from a work assignment in Singapore. His mother's oldest friend described renovations to a cottage on Georgian Bay, which, I will note, is 45 minutes from our house, but this was not mentioned. Then Constance turned to Glenn. She smiled. She was good at smiling. "Glenn," she said, "Cassidy tells me you're retired now from construction, was it?" "Mechanical contracting," Glenn said. "Pipe fitting. I was a journeyman for 12 years and then moved into project management." "Wonderful," she said. She said it the way you say wonderful when a child shows you a drawing. Then she turned to the rest of the table. "I always think it's so important for young people to see that kind of work ethic, the trades." A small pause, though of course Sutton's path was always going to be different. She laughed gently. Several people laughed with her. Glenn put his fork down, very quietly, and then, and this is the part I've replayed more times than I can count, Constance looked down the table at me, pleasantly, conversationally, as if she were asking whether I'd like more wine. "Marion, I was thinking, you know what? If you wanted to have a look around the kitchen while the men discuss, I could have Yvette show you. She's been with us 12 years. She knows every inch of this house. I think you'd enjoy it. You probably have a lot in common." Yvette was the server. The woman who was pouring water 6 feet away from me. Silence doesn't fall in rooms like that. Rooms like that are too well appointed for silence to fall. There's too much soft furnishing to absorb it. But something changed in the air. I felt Cassidy go still. I felt Glenn's hand find mine under the table. I have cleaned houses. I want to be absolutely clear about that. For many years, when Cassidy was young and we needed the money, I cleaned houses in the mornings before my afternoon shift at the supply company where I kept the books. I'm not ashamed of it. I was good at it. The women whose houses I cleaned were largely kind to me, and the ones who weren't taught me what I needed to know about the difference between wealth and character. But Constance didn't know that. She didn't know anything about me, actually. She had decided what I was based on, where I lived, and what Glenn did, and the fact that my blazer was from Reitman's and not from wherever she bought hers. She had assembled a version of me from the outside and decided that version belonged in the kitchen with the hired help. I looked at her. "No, thank you," I said. "I'm fine where I am." She blinked, just slightly, as if the sentence hadn't passed correctly. "Of course," she said, and turned back to the table, and the conversation resumed. But Cassidy was looking at me, and I saw it on her face, not just embarrassment, recognition. This had happened before, I realised. She'd been watching it happen for 8 months, and she'd been hoping I wouldn't notice. She'd noticed. On the drive home, 90 minutes up the 400, Glenn driving, the highway dark and clear the way it gets on 4 nights, neither of us spoke for a long time. "You all right?" he finally said. "I've been better," I said. He nodded. We drove, then Yvette. She said Yvette. She did. "The woman's been pouring water in the same room as us for 2 hours, and she said you'd have a lot in common." I looked out the window. "I know. What are we going to do?" "Nothing," I said. "Not yet. It's not our place." "Marion." "It's Cassidy's choice, Glenn, not ours." He drove. I watched the highway lights blur past. I thought about my daughter's face at that table and what she was choosing, and whether she knew the full weight of it. 3 weeks later, Cassidy called. She'd been staying late at the clinic more than usual. I'd noticed, but I hadn't pushed. "Mum," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "The welcome dinner, what Constance said to you, about the kitchen." I waited. "I heard it," Cassidy said. "I was pretending I didn't, but I heard it. And I heard the thing at tea about Dad. And I heard what she said to Sutton's cousin about where I did my NP training, like she was apologising for a program that isn't McGill or U of T." A pause. "I think I've been pretending not to hear a lot of things." "Oh, sweetheart." "I confronted Sutton about it last night. I told him what his mother said to you, and he—" "Mum," he laughed. "He said she doesn't mean anything by it. That's just how she is, that I need to understand her sense of humour." Another pause, longer. "He said I was being sensitive." I closed my eyes. "He said your mum's not exactly from our world, Cass. She'd have been bored by that conversation anyway." I said nothing for a moment. Outside my kitchen window, a squirrel was doing something extremely committed on the bird feeder. I watched it. "Cassidy," I said carefully, "what do you want to do?" "I don't know. I love him. I think I love him. But I keep thinking, is this what the next 30 years look like? Pretending not to hear things? Moving Glenn and you to the back of every room?" She was crying now, quietly. "I raised you to know your worth," I said. "That's all I'm going to say." "I know, Mum. The rest is yours." 3 days later, she gave the ring back. She told me on a Sunday. She drove up to Barrie, sat at our kitchen table, drank 3 cups of tea. She looked wrung out and certain, which is the way you look when you've made the right decision and it cost you something real. Sutton called her 40 times. He sent flowers. He sent a long email that Cassidy read me excerpts from, though I'll spare you. Constance called me once, and it was brief. "I hope you understand," she said, "that your daughter has made a very serious mistake." "She made a choice," I said. "She learned to do that from her father and me." A pause. "I don't think you appreciate what she's walked away from." "I appreciate exactly what she's walked away from," I said. "That's rather the point." I hung up. Now here's the part that I have debated telling, because I want to be clear that it isn't why any of this happened, and it isn't what any of this is about. But I think it matters, because there's a version of this story where people like Constance face no consequences at all, and I want you to know that isn't always how it ends. 2 weeks after Cassidy called off the engagement, my accountant called me. His name is Bernard, and he has been managing my books for 19 years, and he is constitutionally incapable of small talk, which I find refreshing. Marion, he said, that contract renewal with the Vance Group. You want me to proceed? I sat up straighter. Hold on. Say that again. The Vance Group, commercial cleaning contract, 3 buildings in the King West portfolio. We've had it for 6 years. Comes up for renewal in January. I had started Brightline Commercial Services in 2004. 1 contract, 1 client, a medical clinic on Dunlop Street that needed someone reliable and thorough and willing to come in at 5 in the morning. I was all 3. Word moved the way it does when you do good work. Slowly, steadily, building something that holds. By 2010, I had 22 employees. By 2016, 60. We pivoted to commercial and institutional office towers, healthcare facilities, 3 school boards. I am not listed prominently on the company website. I am listed as founder. The operating name is Brightline. We don't advertise heavily. We grow by referral. In that moment, on the phone with Bernard, I understood something. The Vance Group owned the building that Sutton worked in. We had cleaned Sutton's office for 3 years. Our crew went in at 6 a.m. before he arrived and left before 9. He would never have had reason to know who owned the company. Why would he? And Constance. Bernard, I said, pull up the full client list, anything connected to the Vance family. He typed for a moment. 3 commercial buildings through the Vance Group and, a pause, the Havisham Club, cleaning contract, 7 years. They're on the Havisham Governance Board, the Vance family, listed as founding members. The Havisham Club is a private members club in Yorkville. Old money, older carpets, very particular about their public image. I had cleaned those carpets through Brightline for 7 years. 48,000 square feet of hardwood and wool, broad loom and marble entryways. My employees had polished the brass door handles and cleaned the chandeliers in the main dining room, where, I was now certain, Constance Bance had eaten dinner on many occasions without ever wondering who kept the place looking the way it did. I sat with this for a week. I didn't tell Glenn immediately. I needed to think. I want to be honest about my instincts in that week. Part of me, the part that had sat at the far end of that mahogany table and been pointed toward the kitchen, wanted to do something with this information. But that's not who I am. Or rather, it's not who I've chosen to be. So I did nothing. But then something happened that I didn't initiate. The manager of the Havisham Club called me. His name is Walter Bryce, and before you say anything, yes, I'm aware of the irony. He's been the general manager for 11 years, and we have always had a respectful professional relationship. Marion, he said, I want to speak with you about something sensitive. Go ahead, Walter. Several of our members had brought a matter to the board's attention, an incident at a private dinner in October involving a member of the Vance family. Apparently there's been there was a server present who knows one of our staff. Word travels. I said nothing. I'm not going to ask you to confirm details, he said, but I want to say that the board takes the conduct of our members very seriously, particularly in matters of how they treat people in service roles. We've had a conversation about Mrs. Vance's membership. Walter, I don't want anyone's membership revoked on my account. It isn't on your account, he said. It's on ours. We have standards of conduct. We've had them since the beginning. Those standards don't change based on how long someone's been a member or how much they've donated. A pause. I also want to say, and this comes from the board as well, that when we learned you were the founder of Brightline, there was a significant feeling that we had not been adequately aware of who our partners are. We'd like to address that. We'd like to renew at an increased rate, and we'd like to extend for 10 years rather than the standard 3. I was quiet for a moment. I appreciate that, I said. I'll have Bernard send over the paperwork. There's one more thing, Walter said. We'd like to include a profile of Brightline in our member newsletter. You, your company, how it was built. We think our members should understand who's responsible for maintaining their environment. I thought about Constance at the head of her mahogany table. I thought about the word practical applied to my blazer. I thought about Yvette filling water glasses with 12 years of professional quiet. "Send me the questions," I said. "I'll write it myself." Cassidy started dating again in the spring. He's a high school history teacher named Marcus, which I mention only because when she brought him to Barrie for the first time, he spent 2 hours in the garage with Glenn looking at an old Johnson outboard motor that hasn't run since 2009, and he looked genuinely interested the entire time. He came in for dinner and asked how Glenn and I had met. We told him. The dance in Collingwood. I was in a borrowed dress. Glenn danced like he was apologising for something which has not changed. Marcus laughed and asked Glenn to tell it from his side, and Glenn did. And I watched my daughter watch her father tell the story of how he fell in love with me, and I thought, yes, this is what it's supposed to look like. At dinner, Marcus asked what I did. Cassidy was watching me, a small smile at the corner of her mouth. "I run a commercial cleaning company," I said. "Started it 20 years ago." "That's incredible," Marcus said. He didn't say it the way people say incredible when they're filling space. He leaned forward slightly. "Building something from nothing, that's genuinely hard. How many people work for you now?" "About 210, I said. He nodded slowly. "My mum cleaned offices for years when we first moved here from Trinidad. She used to say it was the most honest job she ever had." I looked at him. I looked at my daughter. She was already looking at me. I'm 63 years old. My hands are rough and I have never once been ashamed of why. I built a company from a single contract on a cold morning in Barrie, and I built a daughter who knows what she's worth and won't sit quietly in the back of any room and wait to be acknowledged. Constance Vance still belongs to a club, just not that one. Sutton is still in commercial real estate. I don't know the details and I don't go licking. I know this. A few months ago, Cassidy came home for Easter and she and Marcus sat on our back deck in the thin April sun, and Glenn made his terrible attempt at paella, and we all ate it anyway and said it was good. And the afternoon was long and easy and full of the specific noise of people who are comfortable with each other. There are rooms that make you feel small. I've been in them. I've also cleaned them. And every single time I left with my dignity intact. That's more than I can say for some of the people who live there. I've thought a lot about that dining room in Rosedale, the chandelier, the mahogany table, the way Constance smiled when she said what she said, pleasantly, as if she were doing me a kindness by pointing me toward the kitchen. I've thought about what she saw when she looked at me, a woman from Barrie in a practical blazer. A pipefitter's wife, someone who could be redirected quietly, without fuss. What she didn't see was the 38 years I spent building a life with Glenn, the mornings I cleaned houses before my bookkeeping shift so that Cassidy could have a coat that fit properly, and a school trip she didn't have to miss. She didn't see the years of showing up, of honouring every contract, of treating every client's building the way I'd want someone to treat mine. She couldn't see any of that because she hadn't bothered to look. That's the thing about contempt. It makes you stupid. Not in the way that shows Constance is an educated woman, accomplished by any measure, but stupid in the way that matters. It closes off your curiosity. It tells you that you already know what someone is worth before you've asked a single honest question about their life. And so you end up sitting at the head of your beautiful table, making decisions based on a blazer and a postal code, and you miss everything. What I want Cassidy to remember, what I hope she carries forward, is that the way we conducted ourselves through all of it was the most important thing, not the contract, not the Havisham Club, not the fact that our company had been cleaning Sutton's office building for 3 years before he ever looked at me like I didn't belong in the same room as him. Those were just outcomes. What mattered was that we didn't become bitter. We didn't reach for the leverage we had and use it the way it was used against us. Glenn sat at that table with his jaw clenched and his hand in mine, and he did not say a single word he'd regret. I answered Constance's phone call calmly, and I said what was true, and I hung up. That's character. That's the thing you build over a lifetime, and no dining room can take from you. And Cassidy, what she did, walking away from something she'd wanted, choosing her own integrity over a version of her life that would have required her to keep not hearing things, that took a kind of courage that doesn't get talked about enough. It's easy to be brave when the cost is small. It's something else entirely to put a ring on a table and walk out with your head up, knowing you're leaving behind a future you'd already imagined. She did it because she understood at 31, something it takes some people a lifetime to learn, that love is not supposed to cost you your sense of your own worth. Marcus asking about Glenn's outboard motor and genuinely wanting to hear the answer. That's not a small thing. That's what it looks like when someone is actually paying attention to the people in front of them. Decency isn't complicated. It just requires you to decide that other people are worth the effort of your attention. I built Brightline from one contract on a cold morning because I believed that doing honest work with care and consistency meant something. 20 years later, I still believe that. Not because it always gets noticed, it often doesn't, but because the work itself is the point. You become what you repeatedly do. And what I have repeatedly done for 63 years is show up and try to do right by the people around me. That doesn't make me better than anyone. It just means I know who I am when I leave a room,